wonderful people, I greet you all according to una time. As if they hot, that's what they bring am here. A lot they happen when Nigeria no know my people. Make una hear the whole truth for this video. And make una not forget, make una share this video, make una hit the like button, make other people, make them see all the things where they happen right now.
President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's letter to the Senate on Friday asking for legislative approval to initiate military action against Niger Republic over the coup d'etat in that particular country threatened to raise the stakes in an already dangerous game. For the apparent de-escalation of the situation following that statement by ECOWAS chiefs of staff and the move to embrace dialogue, we have provided a wider avenue for reconciliation. We have in the studio Achike Chude, who is an African affairs analyst, and he joins us here in the studio. I want to say thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And the clock is ticking. The deadline is almost over. It seems like a game of chess. Who will blink first? Talk to us at this moment in time. What is the best route out of this sticky situation that is like sitting on a keg of gunpowder?
Yeah, obviously we can breathe a little bit easier following the statement from the ECOWAS chiefs of staff. Obviously, it wasn't a decision by them, but a decision by the political heads of ECOWAS. Perhaps they might have been precipitate in the initial reaction to the coup, a reaction of anger and frustration that, after about 4 or 5 years of consistent military coups across the subcontinent, that it seemed as if there was no stop. And so perhaps there was a thinking that something drastic needed to be done. And so instead of the carrot, the stick was used in terms of the threat that was issued to the military junta. And so it is refreshing to hear that even though the president had also transmitted or sent a letter to the Senate for approval to use military action, but obviously a lot of people feel that that is not the way to go. If you look at the history of Nigeria in the continent, Nigeria has always been the benevolent partner in the continent. We have used our size wisely, and we have always used it well for the liberation of Africa. And history is replete with what we have done in the African continent. The trust of our foreign relations, has always been Africa first. It has always been Afrocentric. How do we protect the African continent? And we did that bounteously in places like South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and so we had always been there for the rest of Africa, even though there's the argument that we didn't really derive much in terms of what we get back from all of this, because it's all about national interest. So even when you intervene in other states, even within the African continent, there must be some benefits that should accrue to you for the sacrifices you're making. We have not gotten much, but beyond that is the fact that it's unheard of, really. It's not in our nature and character to launch wars, against other countries. Yes, we would understand the background to this, the military coup, and the fear that if care is not taken, it could spread even to a country like Nigeria and other countries that have not experienced it. We had how many years of a military interruption in our democratization process, and so we know it's not the best option. But when you get to that level of you want to move towards a war, it causes a lot of panic. The consequences are grave and they are severe. And then we don't want to have another Ukraine on our doorstep just beside. We don't want to have another Zelensky, who it would appear has little say over the engagement of his country, even with Russia. The strings from what we have seen seem to be pulled from other sources. And so you now have a situation where about a quarter of the population of Ukraine has left that country and have vowed never to come back. You have 6 million, refugees displaced. You have 8 million, that's outside of Ukraine, 8 million internally displaced. So all of these things are grave consequences. And, when you get into even the nitty-gritty of this discussion, you realize that no country will come out unscathed. Nigeria will be bruised badly. Niger will be bruised badly, and other forces that might go into Niger, either to protect or to remove the regime in Niger, will be badly bruised. And so it's something that I think diplomacy, more diplomacy ought to to be used right now. For now, the military option is actually, and of course, you also need to have this broad-based support from your citizens for war, because if you look at what happened the Korean War, for instance, and all the other wars America fought, eventually America was essentially defeated. For instance, in the Korean War, because the tide of public opinion had turned straight, massively against the American, military establishment, against the American government. And so even the military themselves, seeing the criticisms of their actions or heroic actions in Korea, became despondent that even their own people are not supporting them. So you need that kind of support. And I am very sure at this particular point in time that Nigeria, I'm talking about my country right now, that the president and the government do not have that kind of support that is needed to take a country to war.
All right, Achike. Now, if ECOWAS fails to act like it is doing now, so what's the implication, a wide implication for the bloc on military coups occasioned by Russian influence and the continent as a whole? We are seeing a denunciation of the earlier ties to France, Francophone, to that extent, and of course an embrace of Russian influence, as it were, the Wagner Group and all that. Of course, we know the manipulative tendencies of that action, as it were, taking into consideration the milking of the natural resources of that to fund the mercenary activities, as it were. So on a wider context, if ECOWAS didn't do what it was supposed to do, of course the charter of which all of them were signatories to when it comes to military coups, forbids all of this happening, and then we're tilting towards that, as it were.
Yeah, but again, this is a long story. I mean, you're talking about the Russians now, the Wagner group. You're talking about Chinese growing influence in Africa. You're also talking about the age-old influence, neo-colonial influence and imperialist influence of the capitalist West in Africa and the continent. And then you look at the continent as the continent is today. What the richest continent in the world, without any doubt, but the poorest, and then why is that so? So it would mean that our interactions in the past, all of these years with the West, has not really availed the continent of much needed succor that comes from the strength you have from your resources, both human and natural, resources. So the implication is that experiment has not worked in so many ways. The continent is heavily indebted. In most cases to the West. Now we're going east, we are borrowing, and we're also indebted. Of course, that does not exonerate African political leadership from misgovernance of the rich resources of the continent. So they're as much as to blame for as others, for what more than others, for what is happening. Because there is this generally accepted position that Africa can never be saved unless Africa saves itself. So we find ourselves in that dilemma. Yes, if you remove the French forces, because they have not thrived under French, neo-colonial structures. If we've had relationship with other, countries, foreign countries, Portugal, parts of, Africa, and of course the British, with Nigeria and Ghana and some other countries, and then you now have the French. I think the relationship with the France has been the most toxic because of the neo-colonial structures that they have put in place that have, torn at the fabric of some of these countries, and obviously it has become unsupportable. And so that sentiment against, the French has grown over the years, and this has also led to this. That is not in any way to say that these military people that are in charge are not military adventurers, that they are not there to benefit also from the resources of the state, because we have not until, we see what happens going forward. But the reality, is that we need to be careful. That's why I was talking about Ukraine. We do not want to fight a proxy war, on behalf of the great powers. The consequences will be devastating. And because what they are going to do is that they're going to keep on pumping weapons, all manners of weapons. And already you have borders that are porous, that are being exploited by all kinds of criminal elements, deviants, social deviants, bandits, and all that. So they're going to pour into Nigeria's border. You have an army that is stretched tight in this country because they are operational in different areas of conflict in Nigeria, across the country. You want to burden this army again with this kind of situation. And don't forget that about 75% or 80% of our troops and our resources will be used. Forget the fact that, yes, there are other countries within ECOWAS. The expectation is that Nigeria is going to lead, and Nigeria will do, virtually everything when it comes to dislodging this, and we do not have the resources, neither do we, either in terms of men, in terms of material. So we need to do whatever. So as for the Wagner group, there's always that possibility, that you're replacing, one devil with another devil. So we need to be very, very careful about all of this.
Just quickly, let me just throw this one in. Now, first of all, people seem to say that this is almost a pseudo-conflict playing out between America here in Nigeria, so to speak, and Russia in Niger. Talk to me about this, and how can ECOWAS use this opportunity to capture its old glory and its influence on the continent of Africa?
Yeah, I think the blight of Africa has always been the disposition of African political leaders. It is not as if we have not had bright spots. You're talking about the history of Africa. We had a Kwame Nkrumah at a time. We had a Thomas Sankara at a time, and all that. But these are people that were active during the Cold War, when the battle between the NATO allied countries and the USSR allied countries was intense. And so whenever you tilted, you wanted to move to one direction, you became the enemy of the others. And so foreign intelligence agencies have been involved in the assassination of African political leaders whose ideological fixation and commitment to the African continent was in contradiction to their strategic national security interest. So it's all about, of course, geopolitics. Once they have defined what constitutes their national security interest, every other thing that stands in the way, they get it out, including the assassination of foreign, political leaders, and that has been there. And that was why, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, and I think Jimmy Carter, at a time had to issue executive orders to stop American foreign, agents like the CIA from assassinating foreign, political leaders. That has always been how important this has been. So the issue, and there's this saying, and that obviously it is true, that once Africa is allowed to develop, then some of the economic advantages that the rest of the world has would cease. So the issue, and the typical example is Congo Democratic Republic. From the moment of independence, when they realized the direction that Patrice Lumumba was going, Mobutu Sese Seko was used as a prop, to get him out of the way. And then we have seen what has happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The richest country, one of the richest countries in the world, has never known peace for one day. You go into, the DRC, for instance, in the forests of the DRC, there are airstrips where foreign planes just come in, take away after creating crisis in that region with the various militias. So these are some of the, and so what do we do? In Africa, I think we need to take the advantage of the fact that everybody wants to have a piece of pie in Africa. And so you have to look for a way to be able to play one against the other. Africa obviously is the beautiful bride. About 55% of arable land in the world is Africa. Yeah. Then, cobalt, coltan, and all the other major mineral resources in the world are from Africa. So the African leadership, and I think it has to do a lot with the leadership, the ability of the African leaders to understand the dynamics that are playing out in the continent and what they need to do, to be able to confront this. It will take a lot of bravery and courage, but it is something that can be done if Africa can get together. So we don't need, and perhaps we need to use this issue of the coup in Niger to look for a way for West African countries, maybe using the diplomatic, angle, to look for a way of not just resolving it, but asking themselves, how do we move forward? We need the only antidote to coup, it's not invasion of another country, it is good governance. It's as simple as that. Take away the basis of the reasons that the military coupists, these military adventurers are using, as a basis to stage a coup, and it becomes practically impossible for them to be able to do this. So when you talk about ECOWAS and the rest, there's an African, a president within ECOWAS that has been in power for 18 years. The father was in power in his country for about 36 years. Today, he's one of those promoting democracy. So it is the hypocrisy that people are talking about, but that is not to say that we have to allow, this coup.
Oh, all right, Achike. Now, do you think North African countries, especially Libya and Algeria, will be sympathetic to Niger's military takeover? And of course, they have their own internal strife, as it were. Libya has Khalifa Haftar and his cohorts doing their thing, and warlords. And of course, Algeria too has its own internal issues, as it were. So being, military and,
No, it's good you're asking this question because that would naturally bring you to Sudan, that's having all manners of crisis.
Indeed.
You have countries in the Middle East that have taken sides. You have United States also that has sides. You have Turkey that has taken sides, and all that all over the place. So depending again on what they have defined as their interest, and so we need to have a way to be able to combat some of these issues, obviously. And I think Nigeria, we're told that ECOWAS has also sent delegations to Libya, just like you talked about, then Algeria, because obviously Algeria has made statements in support of Niger that they might get involved. If you look at the history of Algeria, you would also understand this is their anti-imperialist stand. You will understand where they are coming from, why they made that statement. So we need to be able to nip all of these things in the bud.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.